We'll call this meeting of the House Appropriations Homeland Security Subcommittee to order. I am going to, as usual, skip my opening remarks, and also in a phenomenal display of wild, rampant bipartisanship, my ranking member, the gentleman from Texas, has decided to see how that works for him. He's going to skip his opening statement. So, Madam Commandant, the floor is yours for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Amodei, Ranking Member Cuellar, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. And I ask that my written testimony be entered into the record. Thank you. On behalf of the service, I'd like to thank you for your continued support of the Coast Guard, our workforce, and our families. With the funding provided in 2024 appropriation, we can make progress on recapitalization of critical assets, continue key sustainment and mission readiness efforts, and support and grow our total workforce. The Coast Guard continues to deliver world-class, multi-mission safety, security, and stewardship across many missions, from protecting the safety of life at sea to securing the marine transportation system. However, to meet rising mission demands, we must invest in 2025 and beyond to generate sustained workforce and mission readiness and resilience, while building the Coast Guard of the future. Our workforce remains my highest priority. We're transforming our talent management system so we can recruit and retain the best people and empower them to be ready for tomorrow's challenges. In the last year, our workforce has adopted to growing mission demand and responded to my focus on service culture. We will continue to work together to strengthen a workplace climate aligned with our core values. And that is what every member of the Coast Guard deserves. Funding requested in FY25 will build on our current efforts to foster new initiatives and policy changes that strengthen protective factors and improve the workplace experience our people have in the Coast Guard. And your support is crucial. I ask for your help to ensure our workforce is ready to meet mission requirements. Demand for Coast Guard missions has never been higher, and we must continue to adapt to an evolving global security environment and a rapidly changing U.S. marine transportation system. To respond to mounting demands and remain mission ready, the Coast Guard needs your support. Our maintenance budget does not cover our planned asset maintenance projects next year. As we field the more complicated and technologically advanced assets required to meet mission demands facing future fleet, we are focused on properly identifying maintenance needs in our budget. The $30 million request in service system sustainment is an important first step towards those maintenance goals. The service needs increased and reliable funding for our many high-priority acquisition programs to ensure the service can sustain our ships, aircraft, and shore infrastructure. I look forward to working with you to ensure we remain ready for the future challenges we face as a service and the nation faces. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for being here, Admiral. I'm supportive of the administration's increasing focus on China and glad the Coast Guard is going to play a key role. I believe the Coast Guard's presence, for example, in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, and your work with the Philippine Coast Guard are important steps to make sure that we send out the strong message that the U.S. is committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Can you talk further about what you're doing in that region, in particular, what drives the need for Coast Guard's presence versus some other military assets in the area that you're at, and what the $263 million in the budget request will be used for?
Thank you. Our role in the Pacific is critical. We are a Pacific nation, and the Coast Guard has operated in the Pacific for as long as we've been a Coast Guard. The budget support and the budget ask is for additional fast response cutters that will increase presence and capacity to partner with small island nations throughout the Pacific. It adds capacity for training teams, liaison officers, attaches, and mobile support, again, to partner with small island nations. We do a particularly good job coming to them as they are to help them enforce their own sovereignty. Harriet Lane was on budget in a former budget year, moved from the East Coast of the United States to Honolulu, which is her new home port, and she has just completed a trip through the Pacific that involved 12 nations. We leveraged 8 of our bilateral agreements with those nations, conducted boardings in those nations, exclusive economic zones, with personnel from those nations. So we provided the support. The nation brings their authority and expertise, and we reinforce those nations' sovereignty in a way that increases their capability and counters those that look to erode that rule of law in the region.
Now, I understand that through our maritime borders, you're not seeing fentanyl as much as you see marijuana and cocaine. These substances are still dangerous and harmful to our communities. Can you tell the committee a little bit about what trends you're seeing? Because during the southern border, we're seeing fentanyl, but it's interesting that there's a different trend during the maritime area.
Yeah, so we're very engaged in the maritime flows, and which is primarily cocaine and marijuana. Occasionally, we encounter fentanyl at sea, but it is not the primary illegal narcotic that we encounter. It's important to note that whether it's fentanyl at the southwest border or cocaine and marijuana at sea, it's the same cartels that are moving those illicit goods through their illegal networks. And so countering the cartel broadly is important and critical work. We have assets in the Eastern Pacific 24/7 working in support of Jayada South and Key West, which is a Southcom unit. They do the targeting and allowing us to put that Coast Guard cutter onto a target of interest and conduct that at-sea interdiction, where we then interdict the drugs, pull them onto our vessels. Those are narcotics that don't reach our shores, don't reach our communities, and don't result in overdoses, and it's critical and ongoing work. I lead the Threat Interdiction Committee, and that brings a broader federal government look into some of our counter-narcotics efforts, and the Threat Interdiction Committee is focused on fentanyl as well as cocaine and marijuana, and we're engaged broadly across the government in those counter-narcotics efforts.
Thank you. Last question, dealing with introduction of migrants. Admiral, as you know, we're seeing migrants cross our borders, not only through land, but through sea also. In some parts of the maritime border, we continue to see upward trends in your number of apprehensions. Can you discuss with us the current trends and the challenges that you're seeing, and what sort of resources would be needed to help you in your mission?
Yeah, we're involved in the maritime, irregular maritime migration. This is life-saving work. When people take to sea in unseaworthy conveyances, the risk of loss of life is substantial. About 18 months ago, the flows through the Caribbean and the Florida Straits and Windward Pass were significant. That is not true today. We have moved assets. We're very visibly present. We've got unmanned systems, sail drone under contract. That and policy clarity has helped decrease the numbers that we are encountering at sea, but we remain engaged and in position to counter anyone that may attempt those illegal and perilous attempts to reach our shores.
My time's up, but can you just, I'm familiar with sail drones. Can you explain what that is for
Yeah,
all
so
of us?
sail drone is it is an unmanned system that we have under contract. They're built on the west coast of the United States. They're fully autonomous, operated by a command center out of the west coast. They have sensors, so they provide a maritime domain awareness and create a presence. Those attempting to depart illegally know they're out there and work to, it helps to prevent those departures.
Thank you to you and your men and women.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, I yield back.
He meant to ask one more question. Is a sail drone waterborne or airborne?
So it's waterborne. They look, it's like a small catamaran, but there's no people on them. They generate quite a bit of interest if you see them at sea because they're fairly large, and but no one's on them.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar, for that follow-up question. Now, in accordance with his demand to be recognized because he was present first at the meeting, Dr. Harris, the gentleman from Maryland, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not that I agree with that characterization, but thank you very much. Admiral, thank you again for appearing before us. You know, in your introduction, you mentioned that safety of life at sea is obviously a critical mission of the Coast Guard. In your written testimony, you said, you know, you're responsible for the safety, security, and stewardship of the nation's waters. My particular question is about offshore wind projects off the coast of Maryland and other mid-Atlantic areas, because I am worried that the Coast Guard will not be able to protect the safety of life at sea. And let me ask you a couple of questions about that. So obviously the Navy, actually the DoD, DOE, FAA, NOAA, and BOEM all had a wind turbine interference mitigation working group since 2014. Their stated mission was by 2025 to have the solution to the multiple kinds of radar interference caused by offshore wind turbines. They haven't issued a report. It's now 9 years into it. So what they did is they just, you know, I guess reissued their MOU last year, but with no solutions yet. In the UK, they've also been working on the issues for many years, and they have wind farms, but they don't have solutions either about mitigation. Once they thought they had one, but after they built the wind farm, it didn't work. But of course, by then it's too late. I mean, once these wind farms are up, I mean, the Coast Guard can't go in and say, well, you got to stop operating them because they're not safe. So has the Coast Guard or the Department of Homeland Security conducted a radar interference modeling study on the size and number of offshore wind farms being planned for off our Maryland coast?
So we are engaged in that work group across the broader agency. Our role in wind farms is advising on the safety of navigation and safety of life at sea. So there are impacts to wind farms. We need to ensure that we are actually able to rescue people should they encounter an issue in a wind farm. We're closely working with the entities involved with regard to the radar interference, and I'm committed to continuing that work. I understand that, you know, the timeframes have been long, but our role in advising with regard to safety of navigation, we take that role seriously and are you know involved and committed to that advisory role as that work moves forward.
So what have you advised? Because, you know, the Maryland, if it weren't for certain circumstances, that Maryland wind farm would be built already. Without Coast Guard comment on the safety, especially with regards to search and rescue. Is that a reasonable characterization that the Coast Guard, in fact, has not commented on the safety of search and rescue based on modeling studies or actual studies?
We continue to engage the process, and that advisory does include search and rescue and safety, standoff distances. There's a broad role across the North Atlantic as wind farms are being envisioned, and working through the federal work group to ensure that all interests are aligned, and we're engaged in that process.
Well, I appreciate engagement in the process, but what we need is a determination, because they plan to actually plant some of these in the Atlantic, and the people in my district are a little worried that search and rescue would be impaired, because in a letter November 25, 2019, from Captain Jennifer Williams to one of the Rhode Island senators, basically says, and I'll quote from the letter, the studies, the question of the senator was, has a radar interference analysis been conducted? The answer includes the studies evaluated models or existing turbines. These studies indicate that radar interference can be caused by a number of factors, including the size, spacing, and orientation of the turbines, the type and location of the radar settings, the radar operator, and atmospheric conditions. So based on that, what is the Coast Guard's opinion on the safety of these wind farms with regards to search and interference of radar, including high-frequency radar, on search and rescue missions off the Maryland coast?
Yeah, I don't know that we've provided a written reply. I do know that we're 100% engaged in the process to be responsive to that particular concern, and I'll ask the staff to come back with the exact status of where that particular work group and effort is, and I understand the concern with regard to the wind farm development.
Sure. So there is no written reply. Is that what you're?
If there is, I am not aware
Well,
of
if you
it, but
could
I
get that,
will
appreciate it.
clarify that with you.
Mr. Chair, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter that letter into the record, and an article in the U.S. Naval Institute called "Offshore Wind" from last year, "Offshore Wind Energy: A Rising Challenge to Coast Guard Operations," that outlines some of the problems that I don't think have been addressed. Finally, in my last few
Without objection.
Thank you
so
very
ordered.
much. And without, and again, just very briefly, I have this little area in my district called Slaughter Creek. It's a beautiful little area, but they have problems because the Coast Guard puts in buoys in the summer, takes them out in the winter, and unfortunately, it's a year-round channel. It will be dredged deeper because we may headquarter some of the dredging operations to keep the Baltimore Channel open. It could be a very important port, but I would ask that the Coast Guard reevaluate just leaving those buoys in Slaughter Creek there all year round. I mean, it would be a great help to my local mariners. And with that, I yield back.
We don't have any of those problems in Nevada. We don't allow that stuff to pop up. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Iowa for questioning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Admiral. Thank you so much for coming before our committee again. I want to talk to you about a familiar issue. Right in my district, Dubuque, Iowa, obviously is home to the Coast Guard Waiaconda cutter. The Waiaconda and its crew really maintain the critical operations to protect the operations and the vitality of the upper Mississippi. And those cutters like the Waiaconda really help stabilize the transit, shipping through our channels. Getting those products to market is what we hear about all the time from our producers back home. And I mean, that really accounts for trillions of dollars of economic activity every year and greatly benefits the state of Iowa. So ensuring that the cutter and the waterways commerce cutter program is a priority going forward for the region. It's an absolute priority for me. I hope it's a priority for you. So can you confirm that it is a top priority for you to maintain the waterways commerce cutter program?
The waterways commerce cutter are absolutely a priority for the Coast Guard. Some of the cutters that the waterway commerce cutter will replace are 75-plus years old. It's $5.4 trillion of commerce through the inland waterways and all of our port system. This is absolutely one of the acquisition priorities.
That's great, because I think we did the math on it, and the Waiaconda is almost 60 years old. So my staff had a chance to go out on it. I'm hopeful I get a chance to go very soon to see it as well. Let's just say it this way. It's maintaining its operational capacity, but it is very clear that it is an aged vessel, and we need to do something there. So I appreciate your budget request, trying to fund 2 additional cutters, prioritizing that quick build, and of course the turnaround as well for those vessels. So is there a prioritization for which of those cutters would be subject to the replacement with additional funding? And I would certainly hope the Waiaconda would be on the list.
Yeah, so the Waiaconda is on the list. There is a prioritization. The Waiaconda is not necessarily in that first tranche of cutters, but it is on the list as a priority to be replaced. And, we worked through the decisions on how the replacement, based on age and need. As you said, the fleet is quite old. And so, the budget request in the 25 budget helps continue to build out that program of records, program of record of 30, to ensure that we're able to replace all of those aging assets, including the Waiaconda.
Right. Are you working with the program's prime contractor to keep the program moving forward? Any intention of canceling or recompeting the contract for Waterways Commerce Cutter?
We are working closely with the prime contractor, Bird On. To recompete would cause both cost and time delays. This is a critical asset, and we're committed to the prime contractor and moving it forward, and you see the budget request that reflects that.
Great. Well, I look forward to working with you, and again, I hope I can get out and see it in person very soon, so we can just check in to make sure that it's in tip-top shape, at least can get through until we can Band-Aid it until we can make it a replacement. Just want to get in another kind of follow-up to what our ranking member talked about when it comes to fentanyl and illicit drug trafficking. I think China is certainly trying to bypass any legal channels and go around ports of entry, and they're trying to strengthen their supply chains and manufacturing here. We had the acting commissioner from CBP in yesterday. He was talking a little bit about China kind of working to circumvent these, getting around the de minimis, and trying to get across our maritime and our physical borders as well. So how are you really, and you mentioned obviously some of the other drugs that you're trying to counter, but what are some of the tactics that you're taking to really counter these measures from getting into our country? And do you need any other tools and resources to be able to maximize those efforts?
Yeah, so as I discussed our efforts at sea, primarily marijuana and cocaine being interdicted, but they are being moved by the same illegal cartels and organizations, and so countering them broadly, both with the at the land border, which is not the Coast Guard role, but at sea becomes critical. The Interdiction Committee, which is a broad federal government committee, works to integrate some of those, both land border, focused agencies and the Coast Guard, Joint Interagency Task Force and others, to ensure that we're looking at the problem set holistically and including fentanyl, so that we can work to avoid seams in our own structure, federal structure, with regard to counter narcotics. I'm looking forward to hosting that committee in Puerto Rico here shortly, where we will talk about fentanyl and other drug challenges that are facing the United States with regard to illegal flows.
Are you seeing increased aggression from, I mean, obviously the cartel traffic is one thing. Are you seeing any increases in other adversarial encounters? Is there any incidents of that that your crews are seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we are at sea 365, 24/7. We pretty much weekly have a weekly or daily, a narcotics interdiction at sea, go fast, semi-submersibles, low fast. And what the best strategy for that is a Coast Guard cutter with a helicopter that has airborne use of force and an over-the-horizon pursuit boat. And then when we have MPA, that gives us competitive advantage. That gives us advantage over the bad guys in the cartel. And we continue to put that force package together to counter those flows at sea.
Well, look forward to continuing to work with you on that. I think this is certainly a national security issue, and it's escalating by the day with many of our adversaries. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. I yield back.
The gentlelady from Connecticut, the ranking member of the House Committee on Appropriations, Ms. DeLauro, is recognized for your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. We're hearing hopping here today, so it's I appreciate your indulgence, and good to be with you, Admiral Fagan. It's great to see you again. Let me thank you first for your service, and I look forward to your your insights on several issues that are pressing. Let me start with this one. I want to address this. It's a difficult topic. It's the issue of sexual assault at the Coast Guard. I understand that under Operation Fouled Anchor, your team has conducted extensive work uncovering the abuses, and that the Coast Guard is making internal changes to address them. Can you provide us with any updates you might have on Operation Fouled Anchor?
Thank you for the question. Fouled Anchor reflects a failure of the organization to properly investigate and support victims of assault who were at the Coast Guard Academy 20 plus years ago. This comes to light last July, and I want to assure the committee that last July we were not the organization that we were at the time that the Fouled Ankle assaults occurred, and we today are not the organization that we were in July. After that all came to light, I directed a 90-day accountability and transparency review. About a third of the actions that I directed as a result of that review have been completed. We continue to work on those action items. I get asked what's different. What's different today? Why is this different from other times that we've been held accountable as an organization for failing with regard to sexual assault, harassment, bullying, retaliation, retribution? What's different this time is an acknowledgement that these behaviors are not appropriate in our service, and we're going to move to eradicate them, and it's not a checklist approach. This is how we're going to operate the organization. We've brought in professionals to help advise. In fact, I have my senior leadership team in this week. We will continue these discussions tomorrow. We will attain the service culture that we strive for as an organization. We're making investments in the Coast Guard Academy, investments in our personnel system. I need support with an HR IT system, and look forward to working with the committee on what exactly we need to create accountability and transparency in our HR system.
Well, thank you very, very much, and I want to thank you for your leadership on this on this effort. And I'm hoping that we can continue to receive timely updates on what's happening. I think that that's important, and it's good communication. That way, you can let us know what it is that you need from the committee to be able to get the job done. We want men and women serving in an environment which is conducive to letting them do the job and the mission that's entrusted to them. While not directly in my district, one of the prides of Connecticut is the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. Just wonderful. I know from talking to students at the Academy, in addition to providing a challenging and a rewarding academic experience, it also instills important values like discipline, service, and teamwork, lessons that pay dividends, as we know, over a lifetime. I want to ask specifically about facilities and infrastructure at the Academy. While I understand that you're making many such needed improvements, there's currently a focus on reducing energy consumption, being more energy efficient, making the Academy more resilient during times of extreme weather. Can you talk more about the facilities at the Academy? What more would you hope to do if you were provided with additional resources, and how we can be helpful in that regard?
The Coast Guard Academy is obviously critical to building our leadership core. Our officer candidate school operates out of the same footprint, so really the Coast Guard officer leaders come through that footprint in New London. We've made a number of key investments. We're making investments in the barracks. Right now, we're focused on cadet safety, installing cameras, key locks, ensuring that cadets have a safe experience while in the barracks, and continue to work with our facilities engineers and the committee on what those incremental next investments are to ensure that we've got a safe barracks for the students and that we've got academic space that meets our needs to educate the leaders of the future, nautical science labs, shipboard simulators, and look forward to working with you with details as we phase into those investments needs.
Thank you very much. And again, we're anxious to make sure that the Coast Guard has what it needs and the cadets have what they need, both in terms of, I said, that academic experience, but also their quality of life experience, efforts and their safety. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yes, ma'am. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, the floor is yours for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commandant, great to see you again. I want to bring up a quick issue about this right whale enforcement that NOAA is proposing a speed rule. Any vessel over 35 feet would be required to go no more than 10 knots for about half the year all along the eastern seaboard. I've heard from vessel captains, from commercial and recreational fishermen, from our own St. Johns River bar pilots, the dangers that this rule could create for safety of vessels. Has the Coast Guard been involved in this rulemaking?
We are involved in the rulemaking in an advisory role with NOAA, and we are heavily engaged with NOAA on the rulemaking. We've advised on the AIS carriage requirements currently set for 65 feet and greater, and so a reduction to 35 feet creates a number of issues and challenges. We advise with regard to the safety of navigation, the need for commerce to flow. That dialogue and engagement is going on today, and we'll continue to advise NOAA as they work through their rulemaking process.
Okay, so if I understand what you just said, Admiral, you're opposed to the drop to 35 feet?
I'm not making a comment on the drop. I'm just acknowledging that AIS carriage requirements are currently set at 65 feet and above, and so there's additional work that would need to be done should the length carriage be reduced.
Okay. I will just tell you that rule will have devastating consequences, I think, and just want to point that out. Can we talk about your helicopter fleet for a moment? You all have begun to transition to an all MH-60 helicopter fleet, working with the Navy to acquire those frames. You guys do a great job at extending the life of these things. It's amazing, but there are limitations. Yep. And so I know the GAO study recently came out talking about the need to look at a mixed fleet analysis and an analysis of alternatives to determine the needs for future rotary wing fleets. Now that this GAO study is done, it's my understanding you all are supposed to report back to Congress an aviation strategy. And how long do you think it'll be before that strategy is laid out?
We're aware of the requirement to do the aviation fleet mix. As you know, the 65 or the Dolphin helicopter, we've extended that service life beyond service life that any other agency has operated the helicopter, which is why the transition to 60s is imperative. And we're well along transitioning air stations to 60s. The 25 budget includes $168 million to continue SLEP on 60s and an additional 4. We need to continue the analysis to then figure out what that full transition looks like, and also what unmanned aviation might contribute into some of that mix. Well, the C-27 is not a helicopter. Obviously, that was zeroed out in the budget, a clear signal that the C-27 needs to be, sort of transitioned out of the fleet, opening the door and opportunity for what is the right long-range fixed-wing, mid-range fixed-wing, unmanned system, and rotary wing asset portfolio for the organization.
And Admiral, have you put pen to paper on that or pencil to paper to figure out what the cost of that's going to be going forward?
We're working those details now, and specifically, in fact, we've just talked recently with regard to what does the transition away from 27s create from an opportunity standpoint, and I know we owe a brief over here within the next 30 to 45 days, and we're planning on meeting that deadline.
Okay, and those costs, are they going to include, is there going to be costs to re-outfit some of the vessel fleets to accommodate the MH-60?
The new vessels are being built, the vessels that are being built with flight deck capability will accommodate a tailfold, bladefold 60. Some of the legacy fleet, that is not true, but the new fleet will accommodate the larger helicopters.
Okay, and will the plan be then to retrofit the smaller vessels that don't have that capacity?
The smaller vessels that don't have the capacity, we're also looking at land-based helicopter contributions, so that, say you have a ship operating off of the west coast of the United States, that you might need helicopter support for. The 60s have a lot more range and capability, and so you might be able to base them ashore. We're getting ready to ribbon cut on Air Station Ventura. It'd be a great example of increased capability off of the west coast in a way that might increase that capacity. We're looking at all of that as far as how we're operating and how we're doing, how we're working with those 60s as we make that transition.
Okay, thank you for coming on. I see my time is up. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized. The floor is yours for questions of the Admiral.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thank you for being with us this morning. I want to start off and talk about the Polar Security Cutter Program. As I understand, our Coast Guard currently has two icebreakers. One, the heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, which is 48 years old, and the medium icebreaker, Healy, which is 25 years old. We see that in a time of international uncertainty, of great powers competition, if I'm not mistaken, our adversary, Russia, has approximately 36 icebreakers, and China has increased their fleet to 4. First, if you can just talk generally about the importance of increasing our icebreaker fleet, and then I want to talk a little bit about the rebaselining of the current program. And then I've also been reading media reports about the Coast Guard is considering purchasing an existing ship and possibly retrofitting that as somewhat of a stopgap message or measure until we can domestically, but once again, begin producing icebreakers here. So if you can just, again, talk generally about the importance of increasing the icebreaker fleet, and then get into a little bit after that about the rebaselining that's currently ongoing.
Yep, thank you. Polar Security Cutter was my first unit over 40 years ago, and it was not a new ship then. It was built in the mid-'70s, and so fielding new heavy icebreaker capacity for the nation is critical. And we are on contract with Bollinger, Mississippi. I've met recently with the CEO of Bollinger to talk about how critical the Polar Security Cutter is, the criticality of getting to detailed design, and the criticality of begin cutting steel on that ship this calendar year. It will be a complicated ship to build. I'm confident in the design, confident in the workforce, and confident that shipyard will deliver that ship for the nation. Until we get to detailed design, we will not update the delivery date that is still in the works, and it is our top priority along with the offshore patrol cutter to ensure we field that nation capacity. You referenced the existing icebreaker. The commercially available icebreaker is $125 million in the FY24 appropriation to purchase that as a sole source icebreaker. And in the 25 UPL, there's an additional $25 million ask to outfit that icebreaker and bring it into initial operating capacity. It's critical, as you said, this is China's declared themselves as a near near Arctic nation. The Russians are obviously have their own sovereign interest on their side of the Arctic. I've recently been at the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, and our allies and partners are also engaged and interested in the partner. Actual presence is required to ensure our own national security and sovereignty in the Arctic, and that's why the Polar Security Cutter and that program becomes so critical to us as a nation.
Let's talk a little bit about the possible retrofitting. You mentioned or referenced 25 million. Some of the things that I've read have put the cost much higher than that. And also the time frame, it's somewhere between 2 to 3 years to actually come in and retrofit that ship. Which means if that timeline is correct, again, continues to put us behind the 8 ball. Do you believe that the $25 million that you referenced is an adequate amount to retrofit that vessel? Is that just a down payment, and what the retrofitting cost will ultimately be? Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that, please,
the
ma'am?
$25 million gets us to an initial operating capacity. It'll upgrade some of the systems, get the ship painted, looking like a Coast Guard ship, and an ability to begin to operate. But there will be additional needs to bring it to full operating capacity. The timeline and the cost on that is still uncertain. We don't have possession of the ship, and once the ship is actually purchased, it'll allow greater clarity, and we'll come back to the committee with those timelines and what those additional costs may be associated with a full operating capacity.
Is there money within the budget, this FY25, for that retrofitting?
They're not for the commercially available icebreaker, no. Just the initial operating capacity UPL asked.
And then last question is, last year, Admiral Gaucher testified before the Homeland Security Authorizing Committee. And when asked about this, he talked about the need for an additional 8 to 9 icebreakers over the next decade to keep us competitive. Do you agree that is an accurate number? Do we need to be looking long-term at budgeting out for an additional, in addition to the ones that we already have budgeted, an additional multi-ship to build out our ice-breaking capacity?
Yeah, we have a high latitude analysis that speaks to the need for 8 to 9. We do absolutely need to be looking long-term at greater ice-breaking capacity. We're focused right now on a fleet of 3 polar security cutters. An Arctic security cutter would be a less capable icebreaker, but all that are investments and opportunities that the nation needs to consider with regard to our national security in the Arctic, and happy to share that analysis with the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Newhouse, the floor is yours for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member of the committee as well. Admiral, good morning. Thanks for being with us to talk about the fiscal year 25 budget proposal. In looking through the documents, the FY25 unfunded priorities list, a couple things stood out to me, specifically in the major acquisition systems infrastructure. First of all, the Polar Security Cutter Homeport Seattle, money was requested for waterfront improvements and to prepare the site for 3 additional PSCs. And then secondly, something in my district, the Waterways Commerce Cutter Homeports, money was requested to improve waterfront and shoreside infrastructure in Kennewick, Washington. So a couple questions around those. What could you tell us your infrastructure priorities, number one? Also, why you think infrastructure is so critical to the health of the workforce, particularly in the area of retention. And then could you elaborate on the importance of these particular projects and what missions this investment will enable? So I'm guessing some of the similar responses you had to Mr. Guest, but I'd be interested in what you have to say.
Yeah, the infrastructure investment, shoreside infrastructure, piers, shore ties, maintenance buildings, galleys, the types of things that support ships when they're at sea are critical. So all the new ships we've talked about, Polar Security Cutter, Waterway Commerce Cutter, Offshore Patrol Cutter, all come ashore. They come back and need to be maintained and worked on. And so the shore infrastructure investments are critical. As we continue to field new assets as a Coast Guard, the need for more space, and Seattle's a perfect example. The ships, the Polar Security Cutters, will be larger and deeper, and so there's a need to invest. But it's not just Seattle. it's Seattle, it's Charleston, it's Newport. There are needs around the country and in places like Guam as we consider how we posture the force for Indo-Pacific operations. The ships and reliable funding to bring the ships online are important, but equally as important is the infrastructure money to ensure that those shore facilities are ready when the ships are built and ready to return to the port. And so we've stepped into the Seattle work, but more money is needed, and you see that signaled in the $180 in the UPL for Seattle.
Thank you. I know significant attention and investment has been made in the Indo-Pacific region. It's something you personally have witnessed yourself. Could you tell us what assets are most needed to counter adversarial actions such as foreign fleets encroaching on the United States or even our partners' exclusive economic zone, as well as illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing? And then also, I'm really curious as what your thoughts are on the status of the Scan Eagle program, and if you could tell us a little bit about what the impact has been on the Coast Guard operations countering narcotics bound for the United States with that platform.
In the Indo-Pacific, in that competitive space, as we partner to build capacity and capability and help nations enforce their own sovereignty. I spoke to Harriet Lane. With additional funding support, there could be a second Pacific support tender, that type of ship that would create a presence and capacity to partner with nations. The FY24 budget includes 2 additional fast response cutters that we will look to focus into the region and home port in the region to create that on-water presence and capacity to partner with nations, whether it's bilaterally or multilaterally. And so the ships, people, training teams, all are on the table with regard to things the Coast Guard can bring to ensure our national sovereignty and interest in the region. We look forward to budget support for that. Specifically to Scan Eagle, Scan Eagle has been game-changing for us, right? Contractor-owned, contractor-operated, ship-based, ship-launched, ship-retrieved, unmanned system. I spoke to some of our counter-narcotics efforts. It is game-changing. It just changes the dynamic with regard to risk and capacity and ability to do those interdictions. When we have ships operating in the Western Pacific, they operate the UAS as their sailing, operating, navigating, consistent with international law. Again, just create awareness and a tool and a capability that has really, really been helpful to the Coast Guard.
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand that the game changer that has been. So,
Yep.
yeah, thank you very much for being with us today. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to again thank you, Admiral, for coming. Appreciate your testimony. For those questions that witnesses or that members have opposed, if we could try to get those squared away in about 15 calendar days, because as we are all aware, we're trying to move expeditiously here in terms of subcommittee work to committee and on the floor. Members may submit additional questions for the record, and we ask that you respond to those in a timely manner. And if there's any confusion or anything that we can do as the committee to help flesh that stuff out to make everybody's work the most efficient, that'd be great. And with that, I want to thank all the members here, and subcommittee's adjourned.
Efficient. Well, you know,
Actually, this afternoon's hearing.
it does reduce the preaching. Yes, all that stuff.
Yes, it does.
Force.